Let me just start off by saying thank you for inviting me to be part of the program today, because what's happening here today is so important. That's why we do what we do, right? If you care about the future of your country, you care about the future of the state, you care about the future of your community, there's one profound thing you can do to make a difference in what that direction that we go in is, and that's organizing. And so in a minute I'll get to my remarks here as the new Secretary of State of California, but wanted to just add a little bit more to what was mentioned in the introduction in terms of how I got my start in politics, because I'm hoping that it's something that you can relate to, and maybe something that'll even inspire some of the folks when we share the story as we're hitting the streets, because this running for office thing and being in elected office thing is not exactly something I grew up dreaming about or thinking about. My folks are immigrants to this country, as many of you know, living, pursuing the American dream. My parents came here from Mexico and spent many, many years. My father as a short order cook in restaurants around Los Angeles, and my mother used to clean houses. So we were brought up through modest means, as you can imagine. We're product of public schools, Little League baseball, a lot of love at home, probably even more discipline than love at home. A middle child, which probably explains a lot. My older sister is now in education. She was a teacher for 20 years and is now on the administration side of things. And I have a younger brother who works for the city of Los Angeles. So public service, it runs in our family. It's really not a coincidence. We were brought up with a lot of volunteerism because of my mother. It was her keep them out of trouble strategy, I think, growing up. And it worked. But it was through that volunteerism and community service that I developed that warm feeling you get in your stomach and in your heart, whether it's registering voters or planting trees or painting over graffiti or GOTV. You know that the world is a little bit better place because it's something you did that day. Whether you get the thank you at the end of it or not, you know you made a difference. And so after graduating high school, I went off to MIT, got my engineering degree, came back to Southern California, worked briefly in aerospace, but the economy at the time being what it was, I immediately started searching for other opportunities. And at the time, I must confess, yes, I was registered to vote. I did that right after the age of 18. But I wouldn't say I was inclined to get involved in politics, because I was as cynical as some of the folks that we talked on the campaign trail, not the 505s or the 405s, maybe the 105 voter or the 1 to 10 voter. That was me. Or people who are just kind of skeptical and cynical about politics. Really, why get involved? Politicians, quote unquote. I thought it was a bad word. And until finally one day it kind of clicked for me. Wait a minute, I do kind of this volunteerism stuff on the side, trying to make a difference in my community. I got engaged politically. And it wasn't until I made that connection that I really got motivated. So my start in politics, and that was a good word, started off on the campaign side of things. I started off as a campaign volunteer, learning what it was to talk to your neighbors and register voters and advocate on behalf of candidates and get people to the polls. And then it dawned on me like a ton of bricks. I said, maybe the majority of folks in the state capital aren't, the right people for my issues. But if I get behind candidates that I believe in and put in the work, that's going to be my way of making a difference, by just helping good people. And so I did. Started circulating petitions, registering voters, gathering signatures. Lo and behold, one thing leads to another, and I started managing campaigns. And it was fun at the time. This is years before a lot of the online tools that we have now. This is when you kind of sat with a thick binder of paper called the voter file and start doing cross tabs with highlighters and bending pages. Nowadays you can do things like register to vote online and do searches through the web of your political data file. And so that's how I got my start. And after helping other candidates from some legislative races and whatnot, I was chosen as the Southern California Field Director for the Democratic Party in 1998 when we elected Gray Davis as the first Democratic governor after so many Republicans. Thank you. And I'm sharing this story with you here in Fresno, and I'm glad because when I was assigned the southern half of the state, I asked the question, well, what's north, what's south, where's our boundary? Got together with the Northern California director. We just agreed to fold the map in half. And wherever we saw the crease, that was going to be north-south, and that crease kind of ran through Fresno. So my northernmost office was right there in Fresno. My southernmost office was in National City. It had 13 field offices and about 40 organizers working under me that cycle. And of course, we were successful. The Democratic Party hasn't looked back. And a couple of years after that is when I actually took the lead in running for office myself. Running for the city council in 1999, getting elected at District 26 when I was elected, and did it the old-fashioned way. Despite all the people telling me, aren't you too young to be running for office? You know, maybe I was, didn't know any better, but I was running to represent home. And so I didn't hesitate to spend those 6 months going door to door to door to door to door. And when the sun went down, you know, phone to voter after phone to voter after phone to voter. And I was blessed with the opportunity to serve my community on the Los Angeles City Council for those 7.5 years. 8 years later, ran and served in the state senate for the last 8 years. And with the support of a lot of people in this room, was elected Secretary of State. So I'm kind of bypassing I did this bill and I chaired that committee because the Secretary of State piece, it's so exciting and it's fun and it's so timely. You know, I shared with some people during the course of the campaign that grassroots experience, I think, is so critical for a Secretary of State. When we talk about the Chief Elections Officer in California, or any state in the nation for that matter, it may not be the official job, but it comes with an obligation of trying to crack into those 6 million plus Californians that are registered to vote, that don't get out very frequently. And there's other 6 million plus Californians that are eligible to register to vote, but haven't taken that step. It's not easily done. If it was easy, it'd be done already. But it's not. But you know, it's something I've done over the years, and I bring that valuable experience not just to the campaign to get elected, but to the office itself. It's also timely because let's stop and think about where our nation has been for the last 15 years. Let's go back 15 years ago. What year was it 15 years ago? 2000. Anybody remember that presidential election cycle in 2000? Bush v. Gore, Florida, butterfly ballots, hanging chads. Believe it or not, soon thereafter, hear me clearly, Congress acted on a bipartisan basis to pass what we call HAVA, the Help America Vote Act. And included in that was hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to states across the country for new election systems to make sure that that butterfly ballot hanging chat situation never happened again. You know, in California, as with so many other states, there was a flurry of money and then the flurry of vendors to elections officials saying, well, boy, do I have a product for you. And so we had this brief experimentation with electronic machines. You know, the best thing that my predecessor, Deborah Bowen, did when she was elected Secretary of State is put all those new systems through top to bottom review. And if you couldn't audit the results of an election and verify the results, all that equipment was decertified for good reason. Some counties have spent all their money, some counties hadn't spent their money. It was just all over the map. Some machines were decertified, some were allowed to stay in place. The point here, folks, is it's been more than a decade. And whether you're in a county whose new equipment was allowed to stay in place and is now kind of past its life expectancy, or you're in a county like Los Angeles where we went from, you know, punching the card to filling in a bubble. Big technological leap, right? The point is, the question is now what's next? You know, what's next from a voting system standpoint, making sure to maintain all the system's integrity and security elements that Deborah Bowen put in place. I'm a big supporter of that. but also an opportunity to kind of think bigger about what's next. Because if you reach into, if I reach into my pocket, I don't just pull out the brand new BlackBerry, the same thing I had 10 years ago. You know, what were our cell phones capable of 10 years ago? And what are our smartphones capable of now? You know, even though we're going to keep paper ballots that we can count and recount, there's a lot that we can use technology to help us revolutionize how we get people to the polls, how we vote early. And so I've been in office now as Secretary of State for almost 3 months. And when I first said yes to come and speak here today, I thought, wait, I'm going to go in there and give an update on VoteCal, our centralized voter registration database that seems to be on track to be fully deployed by next June. That's going to enable wonderful things like the same-day registration law that's already been passed, signed into law, so we'll have implementation soon thereafter. And then people are going to say, well, what else are you doing? What new ideas do you bring to the table to get more people registered? Because before we start cracking that 42% turnout rate from last November, to do better, we also have to get more people registered to begin with. And so I was going to spend a few minutes talking about better implementation of NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act. So brief update there. Most people are familiar with what we more commonly refer to as motor voter, right? We can encourage people to either register to vote or update their registration when interfacing with the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. It's federal law that every state in the nation designate at least the DMV and one other state department or agency as a voter registration agency to provide this voter registration opportunity. Bill Clinton was president when that was signed into law, but who was our governor in the mid-90s? Mid-90s.
Pete Wilson.
Pete Wilson. And so California at the time, filling just a bare minimum requirement of the federal law. DMV, we have to, but if you could pick any other state department or agency to do voter registration for the public, what would it be?
Vision game.
Close. Board of Equalization. And so for about 20 years, those are the two voter registration agencies we had in California. Well, guess what? The federal law said at least one other, not only one other. So I introduced a bill called SB 35 a few years ago. And we're going to continue to build on that, but let's add community colleges. Let's add the UC and the CSU. Let's add EDD and Veterans Affairs. Wrote into the bill required voter registration through covered California. So think about that. With millions of previously uninsured Californians coming in and signing a form. We're getting health care. Put your name, your address, your date of birth, your signature down, etc. If you're otherwise eligible, let's register people to vote in the process. And so that's now taking off, and we're adding to the rules in a way that's great. So I want to be more aggressive and progressive about how we further implement NVRA here in California. And so I had all these great ideas I was going to come brag about. And lo and behold, Oregon took a wonderful step last year. So the speech just went out the window. Let's talk about Oregon. Frankly, folks, I think it's a tremendous model. It's something that we're scrambling to do the homework on what would it take to implement here in California sooner rather than later. So it sounds like there's a few folks in this room that we're going to get to work together with to bring this about in California. But I do want to acknowledge a couple of things that we're going to have to really be eyes wide open about and work together on to work through. The way it's set up, this model of automatic registration, because government has data, right? It's the same thing that facilitates online voter registration. Use that signature at DMV or some other state department or agency to count towards my voter registration. But let's flip this thing on its head. Instead of having to proactively fill out a form and register to vote to be added to the rolls and show up on election day, let's just put all eligible people on the voter lists automatically. And what Oregon, they're the first in the state to do this, will do is send out a postcard a month later saying, hey, congratulations, you've just been registered to vote. Now there's a couple of important questions that need to be asked. There's a speech issue here. There's going to be that 1 in a million person who says, well, what if I don't want to register? That's my right. That's right. They do have the right to not be a voter, so they can opt out if they want. But the current system opt-in requires a lot of resources, a lot of energy on behalf of a lot of people trying to improve our democracy. So let's flip it around and get the cynical people to have to do the work. All right. Second important question, and this is really rubber meets the road here for proud Democrats. See, government cannot pick a political party for new voters. Only the voter can pick one for themselves. So that card that goes out in Oregon will ask the question, you've been registered to vote, what political party do you want to affiliate yourself with? And so people are going to have to check the box, sign it, and return it. But what happens to the people who don't return their card? Can't pick a political party for them. So they're going to be what we used to call decline to state. California is now no party preference. So I've actually heard a concern from some Democratic grassroots folks and from our friends in labor about, whoa, hold on, it sounds good, but what is it going to mean if we're going to have this big spike in no party preference registrants? Well, first of all, I embrace automatic registration because guess what? Whether they're registered Democrats or otherwise, the point is they'll be eligible to vote. And we can go get them when it comes to campaigns and election time. Second, for folks who are committed to our party, let's take all the previous energy and resources that we used to commit to voter registration, because now if it's going to be automatic, we can commit that time, the energy, the resources to voter education and voter outreach. And there's nothing to stop us from having a re-registration drive. Hey, if you missed the postcard, if you missed the window, doesn't mean you can't re-register from no party preference to Democrat. And so as Democrats, I think we ought to embrace that challenge because it's going to be good for democracy with a little d at the end of the day when there's so many more people registering and voting. So big update for today. The other thing I want to make sure that we talk about is, okay, well, we're talking about registering more people and the work that we have cut out for us to get more people to the polls. But what does getting to the polls mean? And what does that look like in the state of California? Well, like I said, depending on your county, maybe it's completing an arrow, maybe it's filling in a bubble, maybe it's something else. But how do we get either a better experience or more people participating? Again, Oregon is a model, Washington's a model. I get the question asked all the time, why don't we just do all vote by mail like those other states?
Right. Yes.
Look, voting by mail is increasing in popularity on the natural. And there's a couple of counties, just by virtue of the ruralness or whatever, it's pretty much all vote by mail or all vote by mail already. But we're a big state. We're a diverse state. And there's a lot of voters, like my mother, who wants to go to the polls in person. And I believe voters deserve that option. They have the right to have that as an option. And so one of the other things I'm looking at is the Colorado model. Anybody seen their vote centers in action? All right, we have one hand up here in the back. So I'm gonna lead a team in May to the Denver municipal elections to see this vote model, this vote center model in place. And from what I understand, imagine this. Right now, if you don't vote by mail, your only other option is to go on election day between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. to the polling place where you live, and cast your ballot. As we know, because we do campaigns and GOTV, it's getting tough. Sometimes we got to pull people by the ears. Sometimes, folks are working, they get home late, they cut it close, they're distracted. In Colorado, what election day is like is voters have the freedom to go to a number of vote centers to cast their ballot because the voter list is shared. They have the protections in place to make sure people aren't voting, casting multiple ballots in multiple locations. But imagine if we had that here in California where voters had the option to vote. Maybe it's more convenient to vote by where you work, or where you drop the kids off at school, or by the grocery store, or the shopping mall. And get this, imagine if that was the case, not just on election day, but we did it the Saturday, the Sunday, the Monday, and the Tuesday going into election day. all of a sudden, all the perceived obstacles to casting a ballot are taken down. So starting with vote by mail, everybody gets their ballot. Return postage prepaid. Imagine that. Don't have to worry about stamps. And if you want to vote in person and Tuesday's tough, well, guess what? You can go on Sunday or Saturday. You know, voting close to home is tough, well, guess what? You can vote near work. Anything and everything that we can do to maximize the opportunity for people to participate in our elections. It's here, folks. It doesn't require a technology revolution. Everything's in place. If we put all these things together, from implementation of the same-day registration law in the short term, to maybe the automatic registration stuff soon thereafter, to the building on the success of voting by mail and vote centers and the flexibility that provides, I think the future of our democracy is in good shape. We just got to do the work to get there. And we know that with more people register and more people vote, the right candidates win, and the right policy outcomes come out of both the legislatures as well as the ballot box. So I'm optimistic and I'm excited. And it's only been 3 months that I've been in this office, but I know that in this room I have a lot of partners to help make a lot of this happen. So thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for your commitment to the party, to sessions like this. And if I don't see you at the conventions, I'm going to see you sooner, because we're going to continue to travel all corners of this state. I visited all 58 counties on the campaign trail. My wife, Angela, is here with me today. She was with me in both of those counties. During the campaign, and our outreach continues as a family. We campaign and organize as a family now too. So thank you again for the invitation to be here with you today. And I think there's time for a couple of questions before we move on to the next piece. There's a lot of hands, a lot of questions. We'll start right here.
How do you feel about a federal constitutional right to vote?
A federal constitutional right, so all for it. All for it. So, yes, sir.
If you had 4 days of voting at the polls, might there be a problem with finding poll workers?
Good question, good question. So, if we're going to really envision 4 days of voting at the polls, how do you do the poll worker thing? And so here's where we really got to think this through carefully. Because what I've given you is the broad strokes and not the specifics. Well, how many vote centers are we talking about? Are we talking about 1 or 2 per county? Are we talking about 100 per county? How many poll workers are we talking about over the course of 4 days? One of the things that elections folks are really struggling with is, with more and more people voting by mail, less and less people showing up at the polls. And if we have as many polls as we have today, that's really put a strain on the system, let alone the costs for the county. Now, I don't think you can put a price tag on democracy, but there's probably going to have to be this little bit of a give and take on fewer polling places as we know them today, offset by the benefit of the flexibility of where you go vote. And if we do that, then there's an opportunity to maybe engage more people as poll workers, because you won't need as many on any given day. And for people who may want to volunteer, but Tuesdays are tough, well, they can sign up for Saturday or Sunday. And Saturday or Sunday, all of a sudden the concerns about having a voting location at a school because non-students are coming onto the campus kind of goes away. So a lot of details to be worked out here, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a huge net positive. Yes, sir, in the front.
There still continues to be problems with the accessibility of the voting machines for disabled voters. Many of the systems that are currently used are reports of being hard to use or difficulties. I have used them myself, and I find it still easier to, and actually faster, for me to have one of the election workers do it the old-fashioned way of marking my ballot. And just because of the technology that we use here in Fresno County is actually pretty primitive when it comes to audio technology. So I'm wondering what kind of plans there are for that. Also, too, I just want to caution you and the people in the room that voting by mail is not a panacea. It creates obstacles for disabled voters. If I voted by mail, that would mean that I would actually have to pay someone to mark my ballot. So think about that when you come up with a one-shoe-fits-all solution.
Right. So in case you didn't hear the question was generally about accessibility of elections and participation. So you talk about if we just did all vote by mail, the challenge that would pose to folks with disabilities. That's why I said people deserve options. So we make sure to address that. In terms of the accessibility of voting systems itself, so I hope it's good news I reported to you. We're going to keep in place the Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee to the Secretary of State's office. So it may not have been in place when some of the existing systems were put there, but having this advisory committee vet systems that come through for certification, with that point of view in mind, I've already seen how that's going to be effective and helpful for any new systems on a going forward basis. Yes, sir, over here. Mr. Chairman.
Is there any legislation currently in the legislature to adopt universal voter registration that we as a group get behind?
So the question is there any pending legislation already? Not that I'm aware of, but it's early on in the legislative year, and just given the volume of the chatter and the excitement around what Oregon just did, I fully expect that within a couple of weeks, somebody's going to either introduce something or announce a sponsorship or something. Okay, thank you. Yes.
I have another question, but I do want to add on to the question about accessibility. Excuse me, I represent a Democratic club for people with disabilities and seniors, and the president is blind, and he has never voted independently in San Francisco. They have voting machines that are supposed to be for people that are blind, but nobody at the polls knows how to use them. So they're not useful for him, so he has to rely on someone else to fill out the ballot for him. And trust, it's his wife and he trusts her, but it's a real issue that needs to be addressed, so I hope you will tag on to that. My other question was about vote counting. You mentioned as more and more people are doing vote by mail these days, it is extending the length of time before we have an answer to who won the election. So with your idea of what Colorado is doing, and I did a lot of phone banking during the midterms to Colorado and learned about that, how are we going to deal with the votes? We still have to count the votes. Will they be counted by hand, or will we feed them into the electronic machines as we have been doing? And that opens another question on that.
Right. Well, again, here's probably one of the bigger challenges for this kind of discussion in any state, but particularly here in California. Elections are ultimately administered at the county level. Right, there's no, unfortunately, one size fits all or consistency across the board. So we've got to work with each county on figuring. Some count by hand, some do counting machines, OptiScan, et cetera. So that's why I always got to come down to make sure that there's a piece of paper I can count, recount as many times as I want to verify the accuracy of the results and ensure the integrity of the outcome. And it's interesting, as popular as the bill was to do what we call postmark +3, to any vote by mail ballot that has the postmark of election day or prior, as long as it arrives to the county within 3 days of the election, it shall be counted towards the total. When I went to some of the smaller rural places, they said, oh my gosh, we would finish counting in 2 hours, and now we gotta wait 3 days in case a couple more ballots show up in the mail. Well, you know what? Heaven forbid to give people a chance to have their voice counted in the election, right? So 72 hours is a small, time to wait to make sure that people had their vote counted. At the end of the day, most elections aren't that close that you can project a winner. And every once in a while, there's that close election where we're going to have to wait. But I'd rather get it right than get it fast. So. Hopefully that helps. Let's go
San Gabriel had a tie.
San Gabriel had a tie, absolutely.
Over here.
Yeah, well, over here, and then we'll come over here. So San Gabriel had a tie a couple weeks ago, and through a recount, they actually determined the winner. So.
My question pertains to special elections. We have this, what happens is with the regular election, somebody moves up to higher office, creating these vacancies that trickle down. And then we have all these special elections with incredibly low voter turnout. I mean, it's bad enough, the low voter turnout in the off year, but then when we get into special elections and you get down to the point where a very small fraction of the voters are making decisions. What possible options are you thinking about in terms of addressing that issue as Secretary of State?
Great, because it's tough enough in a non-presidential, right, to keep the participation up, at least on a mass level. If there's a contested congressional or contest or something, then they usually do such a higher turnout. You must be from San Diego, where Assembly member Lorena Gonzalez authored legislation last year signed by Governor Brown to pilot what I talked about earlier in San Diego, in upcoming special elections in San Diego County, where everybody gets their ballot automatically mailed to them, and then we have this vote center model. So we're gonna get some empirical evidence of how it's working, if there's any red flags to be aware of before we do broad scale, change across the state. So I'm hopeful about that, and I know that's separate and apart from to allow the governor to appoint replacements or have these special elections. I think ultimately the people ought to be elected representatives. That's where I lean. And whether we consolidate special elections, because these windows of no less than 45 days, but no less than 120-day kind of thing, maybe we had a little bit more flexibility in those time frames. We can stick to the Junes and the Novembers or time periods.
How about short-term appointments?
Short-term appointments with a commitment to not run, I think that's kind of hard to enforce, to be continued. Okay, over here.
Okay, I have a question, and then this young lady has a question. I think the voter ID laws are actually the biggest target is women, and I'll tell you my problem. I moved back to my birth state after 30 years from Virginia. Emergency, I never went home. My dad was sick, mom died. I went to DMV to register my car and also register to vote. They would register my car. I brought bank statement, social security, photo ID, etc. Ton of documents. They told me I had to have a certified copy of my birth certificate, a certified copy of my marriage license, a certified copy of my court documents showing name changes. And when I went to and it took me over $500, 800 miles to drive around this state to get that just so I could vote and get my driver's license. Next, when I talked to Randy Worth, our county registrar, she told me that that's not the way it's supposed to be handled, that there is a way for DMV to access Homeland Security to verify that I am who I am. Are we doing this in every county throughout this state? Because the real target of voter ID laws is women.
Well, all of those fights on voter ID laws or the reduction of early voting or the over-aggressive purging of voter rolls that we see in Wisconsin and Texas and Florida, and I mean, to me, it's pretty transparent. It's not combating voter fraud. Voter fraud, if you look for the evidence, it's non-existent. It's all about voter suppression. So women first, absolutely, because of the maiden name versus married name changes, followed by a quick number 2, students. It's that North Carolina example. If you have a gun permit, that counts for voting purposes, but if you have a state university issued ID, that doesn't. I mean, how transparent is that? So that's what we're up against, but hey, we're California, right? We pride ourselves in policy leadership. From renewable energy to labor protection, let's apply that same ambition to civic engagement and be the counterexample to the rest of the nation. Yes, and then.
As a young person, you were very cynical. So, I was really interested in knowing what made you get into politics.
Get into politics. Well, I gotta tell you, it was not a coincidence. One of these random Saturdays when all my friends got to sleep in as a teenager, my mom wakes me up and says, "Well, they're coming to pick you up in 20 minutes. Get ready." So the white man shows up, and I was off to a laborers local 300 hall getting trained on how to walk a precinct for then State Senator David Roberti, who was subject to a recall by the NRA. And even then, it's like, okay, I was exposed to it, but wasn't exactly moving me. And it wasn't until later in life when I realized, if I want to change my community for the better, you have to get involved in politics, because you have an influence on who your representatives are, then there's hope, right? There's no guarantees, but at least there's hope of better attention, better investment by the city, by the county, by the school district, by the state. And so ultimately getting involved in the campaign and being successful with an underdog candidate, then I realized, wow, we really can make this change. So my number one piece of advice to you is to get involved, volunteer on a campaign, in a political office, you're gonna be amazed.
Yep.
Yes, over here. Mr. now, and then right behind you.
Yes, ever since the days of the hanging Chad, we've had serious concern, and I don't feel that concern has gone away yet. I'm interested in your comments on the electronic machines and how secure we could feel with them.
So let me make one thing abundantly clear. Because for some people, there's a little gray area between a conversation about some electronic machines or technology in voting and internet voting or online voting. We are not ready for internet voting or online voting. And it's for two reasons. Most people will guess the first one, right? Security. Talk to your friends at Home Depot and Target and JP Morgan Chase and all that. But the other one is just as important. Privacy.
Yeah.
You know, in this country, we can tell who votes, but we can't tell how people voted.
That's right.
Right? That's an important distinction. We don't need bribery, we don't need coercion, we don't need that stuff. That's very, very fundamental. Well, the internet is not built that way. So despite all the talk and the rhetoric, firewall this and security that, hey, Mr. Snowden exposed it. When a message goes through the internet, you know where it came from, which account, which device, who the sender was. The message is intricately linked with the sender. So until there is that technological separation, you know, we're not doing our elections that way. Now that being said, I think there is a lot of room for technology on the front end of how we put information out to voters. Not just campaign-wise, but maybe voter guides, sample ballots on jurisdictions, or giving voters the option of getting an electronic sample ballot and save some paper in the process. Imagine an interactive sample ballot where you can kind of click your preferences and print out your own slate to take to the polls, or have links to the campaigns or third-party groups like League of Women Voters and get both sides of, if I vote yes on this measure or I vote no, what does it mean? And even in the polling place. I haven't seen it in practice yet, but I can see the vision where, you know, if we have tablets to make your selections, ultimately print out the paper ballot that you're going to cast, it's still paper. But with one click of a button, you can go from English to Spanish to Mandarin to Armenian to Tagalog to, you know, and if you can do it for one, if you have to do it in one county because of the Voting Rights Act, why not do it in all counties because you can, right? So there's a lot of things like that that technology can and should enable, I think, that will benefit the voter experience.
Follow up on that, we're still worried about, does the state have code for all the machines that are used in voting?
So great question. We're in the weeds here, aren't we? Does the state have code for all the machines that are being used in elections?
In other words, do we really know what the machines are doing?
And the answer is no. But so let me give you a couple of follow-ups to the answer. So I authored SB 360 a couple of years ago when I was still in the Senate to create the option for counties to design and own their own voting systems and the code. Ultimately, that's how you ensure accountability and transparency. So a lot of the systems that are in place today, in some places it's part of the contract, you know, the city or the county will have access to the code, in some places it's not. And so the only backup we have, the only assurance we have is being able to go back to that paper that we count and recount to ensure the accuracy and the integrity.